But Russia is also ramping up its threats to try and ward off more Western intervention. The Washington Post was first to report that Russian officials have sent a formal diplomatic message to the United States warning that US and NATO shipments of the most sensitive weapon systems to Ukraine were adding fuel to the conflict there and could bring unpredictable consequences. Now, that may sound like more bluster from an increasingly isolated world leader, but the threat of unpredictable consequences is sadly not an empty one. Yesterday, the head of the CIA made that point very clear during a public speech.
Given the potential desperation of President Putin and the Russian leadership, given the setbacks that they've faced so far militarily, none of us can take lightly the threat posed by a potential resort to tactical nuclear weapons or low-yield nuclear weapons.
In an interview with CNN, Ukrainian President Zelensky echoed those sentiments, saying the world should prepare for the possibility of a nuclear strike inside of Ukraine. There have been differing opinions from experts about the threat of a Russian nuclear strike since this war began. But there is no question that Russia's nuclear arsenal hangs like a sword of Damocles over every decision Western powers make in this conflict. If Russia were to resort to using a nuclear weapon inside of Ukraine, tactical or not, it would be the first nuclear strike by any nation since the devastating US bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. It would irrevocably change the world in ways we cannot wave off or ignore. So the big question remains, as Russia ratchets up its threats to the West just in time for its new assault on eastern Ukraine, what can we in the West do without provoking a nuclear war with Putin? Joining us now is retired four-star Air Force General Philip Breedlove. General Breedlove served as NATO Supreme Allied Commander from 2013 to 2016. He's now a distinguished chair of the Frontier Europe Initiative at the Middle East Institute. General, thank you for being with us tonight. Let me start by asking you about the situation in Mariupol. I saw a video today from a journalist from the Kyiv Independent showing what's left of the city, which is practically nothing. And this reporter rightly points out that if Russia takes control of the city, they will only keep the land because there's really nothing left there in terms of infrastructure. Explain to our viewers, General, why Mariupol is so strategically important to the Russians to the point that they'll destroy it in order to take it.
Mariupol is key for several reasons. Thanks for having me on tonight. It is one of the two remaining large ports in Ukraine that keep Ukraine connected to the rest of the world for commerce and shipment of grain, etc. And it is a key spot in that land bridge that has been talked so much about from the Lugansk, Donetsk area in Donbass down along the coast towards Crimea. So this is a key piece of terrain, and it's very sad to see it fall. We heard reports today that some of the soldiers there were having to surrender because they ran out of bullets and they ran out of food. And this is a failure of us, I think, in the West to get all the supplies they needed into them.
And the fall of Mariupol would be a huge blow to Ukrainian morale, not to mention a humanitarian crisis, would it not?
It would. And sadly, what we will probably find in Mariupol is the same thing that we found in the north, from where the Russians have left their fingerprints in terror and in war crimes in an area. And so this is going to be another tough slog to get through what we find in Mariupol.
General, you have said in recent interviews that you think the United States has been completely deterred by Russia's nukes, and Putin, meanwhile, is undeterred. You have called in the past for a no-fly zone, a limited no-fly zone. You have said we shouldn't exaggerate the threat from Russian nukes to the point where we don't do anything. And yet CIA Director Bill Burns, who dealt with Putin, of course, directly as ambassador to Moscow in the past, he said yesterday we can't take lightly the prospect that Putin would use tactical nukes inside of Ukraine. Do you disagree with Director Burns?
No, I don't. I think that we have to take serious a lot of these threats. Mr. Putin has written about this. Mr. Gerasimov, as senior general, has written about this. They often say that nuclear weapons are a logical extension of the conventional battlefield, whereas we see that completely differently in the West. But the fact of the matter is Mr. Putin is extremely good at deterring us, and he is doing this to deter us. And as I understand now, he's declared that our weapons shipments to Ukraine will now cause new possibilities for him. And so we are deterred, and he's seeking to further deter us because it's worked so far.
So I just want to get to the bottom of this deterrence point. I agree with you. It's deeply frustrating to see the way that Putin can almost blackmail the West with his nuclear arsenal. But reality is reality. If you're saying that you agree with Bill Burns that he could use tactical nuclear weapons, then we kind of have to be deterred, do we not? Or are you saying we can edge forward, we can push forward with more weapons, maybe a no-fly zone as you've advocated in the past, without triggering that use of, God forbid, tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine?
In our past, we have done this. In northern Syria, under a different administration, we took almost a battalion of Russians off the battlefield. And we were in the same situation with the same Putin and the same nuclear arsenal facing us in that attack. And so it's just a matter of assessing the risks and then taking the appropriate actions. And I think that we need to have those conversations about risks now. The sad news is I believe there are people in this world who believe there's no risk if we do nothing. And I believe we incur more risk every day.
You're 100% right. There is risk on both sides, and we do need to have these conversations. And we are having this conversation. I appreciate you having it with me. The Syrian example, though, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't that a group of Russian mercenaries that were killed in Syria? And, of course, Syria doesn't mean the same to Putin as Ukraine does.
That was the Wagner Group. And as you know, and all the world knows, the Wagner Group is an extension of the Russian military. So we took Russian military off the battlefield in northern Syria.
I guess the way I see it, and you and I may disagree on this, is I worry that on the one hand we say Vladimir Putin is a genocidal, warmongering, war crime committing madman, the worst leader since Hitler, in which case we really have to take a nuclear threat seriously from a leader like that, or he's bluffing, he'll never use them, in which case maybe he's not the threat we think he is. We can't have it both ways, can we?
Well, I don't draw the two distinctions that you do. I think there's a middle ground. I don't think he's bluffing. I think if it goes bad enough for him, he may actually take these more drastic actions. But if we allow the world to deter us in this way, then every nation that has a nuke looks up and says, okay, I now know how to deal with the United States over Taiwan. I now know how to deal with the United States over South Korea. I now know how to deal with the United States over the missiles I'd like to fire into the Middle East. And so I think that at some point we have to understand that if we are going to allow ourselves to be nuclear blackmailed in every endeavor, then we're going to have a tough time in the world ahead.
I guess there's never been a better argument for nuclear disarmament. One last question, General. After the massacre in Bucha and the destruction of Mariupol and other attacks by Russian troops in Ukraine, it's very unlikely that the two countries are going to sit down and succeed at a negotiating table anytime soon, even though the president of Ukraine keeps offering Putin a chance for a meeting. Is there any diplomatic off-ramp we can provide to the Russian president to try and persuade him to end his brutal war, which has taken so many lives, to declare whatever fake victory he wants and just go home?
Well, I think that's going to be very tough, but you have hit it right on the head. We all want a negotiated ending to this. But what we don't want is for Ukraine to have to give up its sovereign territory and its sovereignty as a nation. And so we need to support President Zelensky, who is a wartime leader of the highest caliber. We need to support him and prepare his troops so that they can earn a better negotiation position at the table.
Retired four-star Air Force General and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Philip Breedlove, thank you so much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.